This video is designed to talk you through how to answer a describe question in your GCSE exam, and to give you some tips and rules to help you answer those questions. First of all, when we're answering these describe questions, you should immediately think, great, because if you see a describe question, it is an opportunity for you to get close to full marks, if not full marks, in that question, because all of the answers are contained within the resource in front of you. So it may require a bit of geographical knowledge, but actually all the answers are in front of you, so you should immediately think, yeah, this is a good thing. So some of the rules that we've talked about in class this year. We've used this phrase a lot, say what you see, and that's kind of your motto whenever you're approaching these questions. Some of the rules. You've got to use information from the resources in a describe question if you're going to access top level 3. So some of the typical resources would be graphs, could be line graphs, could be bar graphs, could be scatter graphs, could be pie charts. If your describe question relates to any of those graphs, you've obviously got to quote figures from the graph. Another common resource is a map, and again, you've got to think about using phrases appropriately for the map. So rather than referring to the top of the map, you would say to the north of the map, to the south of the map, to the west, to the east, whatever. Quite often the map will have a key with it, and it would be appropriate for you to look at that key and measure a distance. Maybe not accurately measure 2 points accurately, but you could say sort of within a certain distance there are so many things, and outside that distance there are more things, those sorts of phrases. Quite often the graphs will clearly show trends, so get familiar with a graph that looks like this. This shows a positive correlation. A positive correlation means that as one variable increases, the other increases. This little graph shows a negative correlation. So as one variable increases, the other variable decreases. Quite simple and straightforward. Another good tool to use is the range. The range basically means the difference between the highest figure and the lowest figure that you can see on the graph. So I normally just draw this little arrow to show that. So the range again between the highest and lowest figure, and you can extend that a little bit further. Some of the top candidates will say the difference between the highest and lowest figure is, and actually give a quick figure. You can do that simple sum straight away. Sometimes you might get a small article like a newspaper report or a screenshot from a website, and if it's asking you to describe, say, the impacts of something from that, it's quite useful to name specific things from the report. And quite often when I'm doing a question like that, I'll actually have a highlighter in my hand and be underlining and highlighting what I'm trying to show. The rest of the video now is going to look at some example questions that are common describe questions. First one is from our physical paper, paper 1, quite a common question. Study table 2 and figure 3, which shows the results from a river field trip, and answer the questions which follow. So we've got a table here which has various figures, and then we also have a graph, and this is a variation of a bar graph. Here's the first question, 4-mark question, and in this example the command word, as you can see here, is describe, and the sort of stem of the question is changes downstream. So how does the river channel change downstream for 4 marks? So in this example you would come back up to the top. You would say that at the start the river channel has a width from using this figure, a depth using this figure, and the channel gradient is 3 degrees. We will ignore this set of figures because that doesn't actually relate to the river channel. You would then follow that up by saying 1.3 kilometres from the source, and then quoting the figures, and then finish off by saying 9 kilometres from the source, the values have changed to this. It might be appropriate to comment on the correlation. Has it increased, decreased, etc. Remember, this is a describe only question, so there's no need to explain or give reasons for this. Second question here, describe and explain how the load changes with distance downstream using both table 2 and figure 3. two command words in this occasion. First one is describe, second one is explain. And again, this one is on load, so not focusing on the river. You can see here this gives you the average load size, so it changes from 21.2 centimetres down to 2.52 centimetres. So that's your describe aspect of this. You could develop that a little bit further by talking about the highest frequency in terms of the rock type. So here we can see high numbers of very angular rocks, so I would quote 40% at 0.3 kilometres, and I would also say there's also 40% of angular rocks here. So I'm identifying this as the highest two figures. We can also see that there are small figures for these two, but don't forget it's always important to also mention what's not there. So at 0.3 kilometres from the source, you could also say that there are no well-rounded or rounded rocks. To develop your description a bit further, you can talk about 9 kilometres from the source. The most frequently occurring lode shape is well-rounded with 60%, and again it might also be appropriate to say that there are no angular or very angular rocks here. The explain aspect of this would be to give reasons for that, and we know that from our work that the obvious reason for that is erosion, and you would go into and explain. At this stage, I would pause the video and I would actually have an attempt at each of these questions. So write them out on a piece of paper and have a go at writing your own personal answer. Okay, if you've written your answer, you can now have a look at the mark scheme. So for the first question, we can see here, this is what they're looking for with regards to a level 3 question. So the candidate describes the changes in width, depth and slope, and illustrate their answer with data from the table for at least 2 of the 3 aspects. I would always just do all of them because it's easier. And then you can see from here down to here, this is what an example answer would look like. So make an assessment of your answer. Does it meet the requirements of a level 3? And give yourself a coordinating mark. You can then do the same for the level 3 for the second question. So it says here that the candidate describes the changes in shape and size in detail and offers an explanation for both. So the load decreases in size. You can see the use of figures. The rocks also become more rounded and smoother downstream. There's some additional figures. And then the explain starts here. The overall decrease in size is due to erosional processes. We can see attrition mentioned here, whereby the rocks hit against each other, breaking down in smaller pieces, and abrasion. It's good practice. The examiners will always look for the naming of 2 additional processes. If you were just to say erosional processes, but not actually mention abrasion or attrition, you'll be confined to top end level 2, which is 3 out of 4. So that's our first describe question. Hopefully you've been able to apply some of those rules and you've done well. You can now come across and look at question 2. You can see this is again another describe question. This time it's for a sort of a newspaper article which we've talked about before. A newspaper article discussing the impacts of flooding. So describe fully one possible impact this flood had on local people, and then explain how human activity can have an increase the risk of flood in urban areas such as Morpeth. At this stage it would be useful if you just pause the video and have a go at these 2 questions. Okay, having had a go at the question, here's the mark schemes. So here's what you can see they're looking for 3 out of 3. A B&B was flooded is kind of the point of this answer. The explain is this means the owners lost trade and will have the expense of cleaning their property. Is the explain and expand. Or you could also say they may not be able to afford insurance in the future and could go out of business. So there are a range of answers here. 3 marks, point, explain, expand. Level 3 must have clear reference to figure 4. Second part, explain. Again, point, explain, expand, answer. Some towns are built in floodplains where there's a high risk is the point. Urban areas have much tarmac and concrete and man-made drains is the explain. And then they're expanding on that by saying these impermeable surfaces lead to rapid runoff which cannot infiltrate the ground. So point, explain, expand for 3. Third and final example question is probably a little bit more difficult, the dreaded depressions question. So Study figure 7, which shows a weather system over the British Isles, and answer the questions which follow. Fairly typical standard depression. Okay. First question says complete the key, so you guys need to complete the key here and here, and complete the key here. Fairly straightforward and simple question. Next one, describe and explain the change in temperature as the weather system moves across the British Isles. So remember some of the rules that we have for depressions. We've said that depressions form west of the UK and track east. The examiners have been pretty kind to you here. They've included an arrow to help you with that. So the suggestion is that as the depression moves from west to east across the UK, that will go through a number of temperature changes. You can see Norwich here, which is in front of the warm front, has a cold temperature, because remember it's in cold air. Cardiff is in the warm sector, has a high temperature, and Cork back here is in the cold sector, so again has a low temperature. So anywhere in the UK will experience that same pattern of temperature change across the UK. So your describe, again, you're looking to use figures, you're looking to use accurate figures from the resource, and then your explain needs to talk about the impact of the different air masses, because remember, the depression forms west of the UK with the polar maritime air mass coming down from the north and the tropical maritime air mass coming up from the south. These two air masses interact. The tropical maritime air mass ends up as the warm sector, and all the rest of this is polar maritime air mass. That explains why we've got cold, warm, cold. So have a go at writing your answer for the second one. Pause the video now. Okay, here's your mark scheme. Two aspects to the question. The examiners are looking for a detailed answer which describes both the increase and decrease in temperature and explains why with reference to the passing of fronts and air masses. So this is what they're looking for a 5 out of 5. The temperature will increase from 6 to 10 and then decrease back down to 4 degrees C. So that's your describe. The explain starts here. The temperature increases as the warm front passes and falls as the cold front passes. The air masses change. The temperature increases because warm tropical maritime air mass is in the warm sector, and as the cold front, we're back into the cold polar maritime air mass. So this video has now talked you through how to answer describe questions and given you 3 practice questions.